ค่ะกลับมาอีกครั้งหนึ่งนะคะในครั้งนี้ดิฉันจะนำเข้าสู่ช่วงเวลาที่ทุกท่านกำลังรอคอยซึ่งก็คือช่วงการสนทนาในหัวข้อ Reflections with Founders of the Net โดยได้รับเกียรติจากผู้ริเริ่มอินเทอร์เน็ตถึง2ท่านค่ะท่านแรกปัจจุบันดำรงตำแหน่งเป็นประธานคณะกรรมการบริหารองค์กรอินเทอร์เน็ตสากลหรือ ICANN นั่นก็คือดร. Steve Crockerนอกจากนี้ท่านยังเป็น CEO และผู้ก่อตั้งของบริษัทชินคูโรซึ่งเป็นบริษัทวิจัยและพัฒนาการแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลทางอินเทอร์เน็ตส่วนท่านที่2ปัจจุบันดำรงตำแหน่งเป็น Vice President และ Internet Evangelist ของ Google Inc. ท่านคือ Mr. Vint Cerf และดิฉันขอแนะนำคุณพิชัยชื่นสุขสวัสดิ์บรรณาธิการบริหารบริษัท Post Publishing จำกัดที่จะมาร่วมพูดคุยกับท่านทั้งสองดิฉันขอส่งเวทีนี้ให้กับคุณพิชัยค่ะ
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This welcome to the 25th anniversary of INET. We have a special occasion tonight. We've just listened to an introduction to one of the two founding fathers of the internet. I'm actually thrilled to be here. I had the pleasure of meeting Steve Crocker there yesterday. And we hope Vint Cerf is still with us. Vint, are you here? Can you hear us there?
Absolutely.
All right. Can you tell us where you are? Because we were just debating over dinner where you are.
I'm actually sitting in the kitchen of my home in McLean, Virginia.
Okay, so it's not too early. It's about 10 o'clock, my guess, right?
Yes, that's right. In the morning for me and late in the evening for you.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll start the evening tonight. It's a conversation with one of the two founding fathers of the internet. Of course, the internet we know, as it is today, is a process, and there were very, very many individuals involved, but these are the two prominent individuals here with us. Gentlemen, I pose this question. I know you probably have been asked this question many, many times before, but say for the benefit of all of us here, when you started work on the internet, linking the computers together, did you ever envisage what we have today when you started? Any of you two, please, just please, cherish your views.
Well, I'd like to jump in for just 1 second and say that Steve Crocker has the unique responsibility for having begun work before the internet on the predecessor, ARPANET. And I think his ambitions at the time were mostly focused on getting computers to communicate with each other. What we discovered, especially as the internet unfolded, starting in 1973, and when the World Wide Web arrived around 1991 from Tim Berners-Lee, that we actually had a system that connected people together, perhaps more importantly than just connecting computers to each other. Maybe Steve can respond, but I can tell you that we had some idea of what might happen, but the world as it now appears with some 3 billion people connected is not one that I personally envisaged 40 years ago.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah. Sometimes I give a humorous answer about being able to see everything and that everything's unfolding exactly on the schedule that we had laid out. But let me give a bit more serious answer. We had the extraordinary good fortune of building this network in an environment where there was already research going on in other activities related to computers. So we could see the future. There was a laboratory where the mouse had been invented and was already in use. Hypertext was in use. Fancy graphics were in use. Large data stores, at least large by comparison with what was available elsewhere. So they weren't available in stores. They weren't available at consumer prices, but the concepts were working. And if you lived in that environment, you actually, without even thinking about it, were living in an environment that would unfold in a commercial sense over the next several decades. So much of what we have today at least in the technology sense, is what we were able to see back then. And so it was very quickly obvious that we were going to have computers connected, that a computer that was not connected to other computers was simply not going to be interesting or going to survive. What I didn't see, and what I think Vint is saying didn't see, is the effect after that of having computers that were extremely inexpensive and hence ubiquitous. And so we could see, I could say, every business, every university would be connected. What I didn't see was that my grandmother and grandfather, or that my grandchildren would, or that children before they could speak would be using tablets because they could make it work. And so that impact of having basically everybody you know connected, having every form you fill out asking for your email address, was just a little bit beyond the visions that we had 40 years ago.
You know,
I wonder
yes,
if I
Vint,
could
please.
jump in for one more second, please. Something very strange happened in the late 70s and early 80s, and that was the arrival of the personal computer. And what I found rather surprising is that those devices were designed to be used independently and not connected to anything. So what is peculiar, of course, is that eventually when they became part of the networked environment, they were the primary tools for making the internet a useful system. Before the advent of the personal computer, we were using large-scale time-shared machines, time-sharing having been invented in the 1960s. So during the ARPANET period, most of the machines we were using were large-scale time-shared machines used by many people. So the advent of the personal computer, which was intended to be for personal disconnected use, became the primary tool for connected communication. And that's what I'm using today. It's a laptop sitting in front of me.
But when you look back, I mean, what both of you started working on, and others as well, of course, actually changed the lives of billions. I mean, certainly, I mean, we do things because we want to make a difference, say. I mean, I'm not sure that ever entered your mind.
Billions did not enter my mind.
Vint?
Well, you know, the result, of course, is clear. Many, many billions of people's lives have been changed, whether they are active online users or maybe only the beneficiaries of side effects of other people's use. But that wasn't what motivated me anyway. I think what motivated me was the sheer fascination of making things connect to each other that hadn't been connected before. Doing something in one place and having an effect show up thousands of miles away. That was the ultimate beguiling aspect of computer networking. The idea that we would change everybody's lives wasn't the motivator for me, although I've frankly been watching and benefiting from the effects. But that is not the thing that drove my interest.
What was your motivation, Steve?
I too was fascinated by the idea that you could connect computers and that you could get the benefit of disparate computers working together, that specialized capabilities in one place could be combined with specialized capabilities in another place. My own focus at the time was in another area, and I was quite interested in artificial intelligence, in how to make computers smart and how to understand the complexities of the human mind. I had quite a bit of experience programming and working at the systems level with computers, and so when this project came along, I was drawn into it as with the mindset that this would be something relatively quick. We'll just take care of connecting these computers together, and then we'll get back to doing serious research. And in fact, I was sort of full of myself as a young man. I would kind of sneer that this network only had socially redeeming utility, that it didn't actually have any real content, any depth to it as a research topic. But it was a necessary kind of a task. We'll just get on and do it, and then we'll move on to something else.
What were you thinking when the internet really took on, and then suddenly you saw the advent of eventually like social media? We had High Five, we've got Facebook now, and people are interacting, and what's happening now, as we all know, it's people being able to express a view, people are able to sort of come together in clusters and groups. Ideas can develop and evolve and actually put pressure on things and maybe cause things to change.
We saw, frankly, in the development of the network itself, the network effect of bringing people together. The ability for people to write something and somebody else would respond to it, even though it was clumsy in a sense. We saw that effect right immediately. And then there were a number of, everybody who was involved, I think, has his own personal story about where the interesting mark points are along the way. I'll tell you two, and then I'll let Vint dominate the rest of the time. In the early 1970s, I worked at DARPA in Washington, and I introduced two Air Force captains to each other, one from Alabama and one from New York. Now, the U.S. military has its own communication systems, including telephone systems, so that you can call just like an internal, it's like a big enterprise. These two Air Force captains, when I introduced them to each other, exchanged their email addresses instead of their Autovon telephone numbers, and I thought, we got it. That was a moment in which I knew that the impact was there, that at that level, these are junior officers, understood that that was a preferred mode of communication, and it was without prompting from me. A much more personal story. When I met my wife, she's from a medical family. Her father was a well-known professor of medicine, and her parents were a little surprised that she would be interested in somebody who was not a doctor. And she tried to explain to them what this network stuff was that I was working on, and they couldn't make any sense out of it all. Some years later, after we were married, my wife took ill, and we moved rather quickly overnight back into her parents' house so they could manage her medical care. And I, at that time, was a director of a laboratory, and I had people working for me, and I wanted to continue to manage at a distance. And so I borrowed a terminal, and I brought it into the house. And in the sole single confrontation that I've ever had with my mother-in-law in 40 years, she said, "There's no room for that in this house." And I had to drag it back down the stairs and out the car and make some other arrangements. Time passes, and we eventually got her a laptop, and she was running a business out of her house, and she took great delight in stealing the Wi-Fi signals from her neighbor's house. And my stock has gone up gradually over time. So,
Vint, any thoughts, please?
Well, I'm still recovering from that wonderful story. A couple of observations. First of all, in the earlier days, during the ARPANET period, even before, or maybe about the time that Steve went to DARPA, we encountered an application called electronic mail. This became visible to all of us and used by all of us in the 1971 period very, very quickly. After that was unleashed, we saw the creation of distribution lists on email. And the first two were called Sci-Fi Lovers for people that like reading science fiction. And the other one was called Yum Yum, which is about restaurant reviews in the Palo Alto area near Stanford University. The point is that both of those were social networks for all practical purposes for people interested in some particular topic. So 40 years ago, we were seeing some of the social effects of being able to link people together through networks and to allow people to discover each other solely because they had a common interest, not because they knew who each person was at the outset. So that's the first point. Second point, I wanted to emphasize and congratulate everyone on the anniversary, 25th anniversary of the founding of the .th top-level domain, and point out to you that that was 1988. That's only 5 years after the internet was turned on in 1983. What that says is that Thailand has been participant in this internet story from a very, very early stage with regard to its operational ability. And I'm very excited about that. And I've just been reading about the IP version 6 initiatives that the Thai government is undertaking to make sure that there are some 300,000 free Wi-Fi access points around the country, that students will have access to tablets. It looks to me as if Thailand has become an extremely vigorous user of internet and a developer of infrastructure, and that's much to be celebrated.
Thank you. I was just a curious question with all the social media, just to follow on about that. Do you communicate using social media as well?
We're doing it right now. You just can't see it.
Personally.
Yeah, this is called Google Hangout, and it is part of our Google Plus social medium. It's becoming extremely useful, not only for this kind of a situation or perhaps private interests and things, but we use it a great deal at Google for business purposes. Small groups of up to 10 to 12 people or more can convene very, very quickly. I mean, it took literally seconds to set up this particular video conference, as opposed to having 3 engineers around trying to make sure that the audio and the video are all functioning. So this casual ability to communicate in groups in this fashion is an extremely powerful enabler. And I know that in Thailand, as bandwidths go up, that this will be used as a tool as well, I'm sure.
Just to continue on then, with regard to the internet, I remember I asked Steve this yesterday when we had a short conversation. Where do you see the future going, and where will the internet be? And I remember you said at one point you said it would disappear. And could you explain and maybe elaborate to everybody what you mean by that? And Vint, after that, please.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear Vint's reaction, which is very deeply embedded in the making the future happen. So I think I said a couple of things. One was that I think the internet will become not only ubiquitous, but not the focus of attention. It will simply become part of the underneath girding of everything we do, and that people will stop talking about being on the internet. You'll stop thinking about whether you're on or off the internet. It'll just be part of everything. So it'll be like internet inside. And I think the words I used it would submerge. It will become embedded. And that our attention will be focused in other aspects of this. The other thing which, go back to what Vint was talking about the rise of personal computers. There's an interplay between the increase in the technology that we have available and the decrease in the size, and all of that makes it much more usable on a personal basis. The next steps somewhere along the way, in my view, will be voice interaction, which happens a little bit today, but I'm talking about as natural as you and I are talking back and forth. So that imagine that you could have something that is live and available to you that's sitting notionally on your shoulder, and you can just sort of talk to it, and it's there for you. Now, it might be there for the government to spy on you, and that's a whole nother discussion and so forth. But anyway, imagine that you have that kind of facility, and that it is just always with you and available for whatever you want to do. That will be another big game changer, in my view.
Vint, could we have your views, please?
Well, what you're seeing right now, I hope, is that I'm wearing something called Google Glass, and this is an example of what Steve was talking about. For all practical purposes, this is a device which is as powerful as a mobile. It accepts voice commands. It accepts gestures along what would be a touchpad over here. It will accept a request to take images, to record a video, to send an email, to get directions for driving from one place, or walking, or bicycling. The whole idea here is that the computing capability and the communications capability are, as Steve says, completely submerged, and your focus of attention is on what does this device do for you. And in the same way that the laptop, once it's been connected to the internet part is almost, it's invisible. What's important is the application. And a man named Mark Weiser who was at Xerox PARC, coined the term ubiquitous computing. And what he meant by that is that the computing would just sort of submerge into everything, into the appliances around us, into the buildings that we live in, the automobiles that we drive, the clothing that we wear, the things like this that we wear. All of that will have computing capability, but we won't think of them as computers. We'll think of them as devices that we use and that are of use to us. And I think this is a very reasonable projection of even the near-term future. One of the reasons it's so important that Thailand is focusing on getting IP version 6 implemented is that the address space is vast. It's capable of supporting something like 340 trillion addresses, which is what we will need when literally billions, many tens of billions of devices are part of this network environment. So I agree with Steve's assessment that we will not think about networking anymore. We will think about things that are of use to us that just happen to be enabled by the internet.
Just a quick question, if I may. I mean, I asked Steve this yesterday. As the internet becomes submerged, as you say, we have access. And it's not just through a personal computer. With regards to news and information, I asked this about it yesterday, and increasingly in the West, the role of newspapers, for example, is declining pretty rapidly, and people get information online. And how do you see that future?
So what I said yesterday when you said, what's the future of newspapers, I said, what's that?
Yeah, I know. You were talking to a bunch of journalists.
So, actually, go ahead, Steve.
Well, the need for collecting information, gathering it and filtering it, and packaging it for others to use, and having some taste and judgment about what's relevant, I think those fundamental functions of reporting and editing will in some fashion continue.
Right.
Now there are many options for how to do that, and the current model of having sort of large businesses and very formal structures with the news organizations is currently under challenge, of course, and that's what the news conference focused on.
Correct.
A lot, and there's no news in that.
No.
But the fundamental requirement of how do you manage the enormous amount of information out there, and having people who are good at finding what's relevant, having people who are good at finding how to aggregate it, how to package it, and is a service to each and every one of us as a consumer. And I think those kind of fundamentals, one fashion or another, will have to continue.
Right.
How much of that is done by big organizations? How much is done by freelance individuals? How much of that is done by smart machines that are doing those services? I think all of that is going to play out in a very interesting way that is very hard to predict.
Right. Vint, any thoughts on that, please?
Well, I think the term newspaper tells you a lot right away. The first observation is that there was a time when paper was the cheapest and fastest way to get a lot of information out to many people on a regular basis. And because it was an inexpensive way to do that, and people were interested in what's new, they were also tolerant of having advertising adjacent to the newspaper stories, and that, of course, paid for the enterprise. It's my belief, I think Steve would share this, that high-quality journalism is very, very important to democratic societies. And so we all seriously need to find ways of recasting the business model that supported the notion of newspaper, only now it's going to have to be the delivery of news with good quality journalism, both editing and investigative reporting. Whether that's done, as Steve asks, in large-scale enterprises or by some other means is an open question. But I think the importance is so high that many of us, including me and Google, will be very interested in finding ways to facilitate that high-quality journalism as the future unfolds.
The internet has changed people's lives, but there are a lot of positives. That you must have, there are negatives as well, the way it's used, how people have used it, and especially in the social media. Do you have any areas of concern currently, in the past or in the future? Vint or Steve, please.
I'll let Vint go.
Well, let me start out by saying that one of the disappointing things about creating large-scale infrastructure is that people can abuse it. When we began this work, there was a fairly homogeneous collection of engineers whose interests were reflected in many of the applications that emerged out of the ARPANET and the Internet experience. But as the general public got access to it, beginning in 1988 or 89 or so, at least in the US, we began to see people abusing the system. The problem here is that not everyone has everyone else's best interests in mind. And so there is abuse on the network, and we do have to do something about it. One of the challenges is that the abuser may be in one legal jurisdiction and the victim in another. And this could cross international boundaries as well. So we're going to have to seek common agreement on an international basis as to what constitutes abuse, what is unacceptable socially, and what we should do about it. Passing laws often is ineffective, especially if they can't be enforced. And so we may have to make use of additional methods for persuading people not to do things that are harmful. One of the obvious things is moral suasion. To just say, don't do that, it's just wrong. Another possibility is to say, well, we can't stop everyone from doing some of these things, but if we catch you doing it, and we've all agreed that it's socially unacceptable, then there have to be consequences. So we will have to deal with this technology as we have with others. To give you an example, certainly in the US, and I presume in Thailand, it's considered illegal to drink alcohol and then drive, cause damage, harm, possible death. We can't stop people from doing that, but we can tell them that if we catch them doing that, there will be consequences. There may be fines, or maybe you might be put in jail, you might lose your driver's license. So we have to employ both social and legal methods in order to minimize or reduce the level of abuse. And I think the same kinds of things will probably factor into the way we deal with the Internet.
Yeah, let me, the risk of going a little too abstract, stand back and take a very long view of this. I recently read a book by Jared Diamond on the world until yesterday, talking about what society looked like prior to the formation of nation states, tribes and chiefdoms and small organizations. One of the most important points that he makes with an enormous amount of data is the whole theme of risk reduction, and how each of those societies dealt with a variety of different risks, from risk of not having enough food to risks of war and so forth. And the transition into the nation states had a dramatic impact on reducing the risks that societies face, even including the risks of loss of life due to war, that as horrendous as the massive large-scale wars that we've observed in the last century or so, they are relatively small from a percentage impact point of view compared to the near state of total warfare that existed on a continuous basis. Right. So if you look at this very broad arc, and I'm talking about looking at a very big picture here, of the evolution in societies as focused on how do you reduce risk, and then you look at the specifics of the creation of institutions and the development of technology and so forth, you have modern mechanisms. You have law enforcement, you have the rise of the state so that it has supreme power, rather than having everybody take the law into their own hands. You have on the commercial side, you have the creation of insurance as a way of transferring risk. You have commodity markets in the marketplace to transfer certain kinds of risks. We are in a transition period with respect to the introduction of the internet technology. It is challenging some of the boundaries that we've set up. It is challenging the effectiveness of some of the mechanisms that we have available in society. And at the same time, it is stimulating the thought process for how do we go beyond what we currently have. So as Vint alluded, we're going to have laws. They're going to have to be cross-border laws, but there's also an enforcement problem. And there is, more deeply than just passing laws, the development of new standards that everyone learns from birth about how to behave, what the moral norms are, and development of those gradual shifts. Where all that winds up is extremely hard to predict, but I'm pretty sure that, as I say, we're in a transition period of, now that we've got the new technology and now that it's causing both positives and negatives, of resetting where those boundaries are, of figuring out how do we make the adjustments to have the benefits and at the same time reduce the risks that we've encountered.
But when you say we're in
So
our transition...
I wonder...
Yes, Vint, please.
I just wonder if I could amplify on this. It's a beautiful theme that Steve has introduced. There are two things to observe. One of them is that new technologies often precede the development of social norms and conventions that make the technology comfortable for people to use. When Brownie cameras were introduced in the early 20th century, people were shocked that anyone would take a photograph of someone at the beach. You remember beach attire at that time was, for all practical purposes, like wearing full clothing. And yet people were very disturbed by the fact that someone could take a photograph. Well, eventually we evolved practices to deal with that concern. The other point that I want to make is that Steve mentions the nation state. One of our colleagues, Bertrand de la Chapelle, who is French and a member of the board of ICANN that Steve chairs, has brought up a very interesting post-Westphalian notion. Now, we all remember the Treaty of Westphalia. It was in 1648, and it created the notion of nation-state. It created the notion of sovereignty, and it allowed states to be sovereign within their boundaries. What Bertrand tells us is that the internet creates a kind of post-Westphalian need for nation states to recognize that they do not and cannot exercise full sovereignty if there are things that happen in the state that affect others. So an example in the physical world would be a river flowing from one country to another. If country A pollutes the river just before it goes into country B, it has an impact on country B. We can't allow country A to treat that as a purely sovereign act. And the internet introduces a similar kind of problem because acts in one country have potentially harmful effects on others in other countries. So we're going to have to cope with a post-Westphalian view of the way our world functions.
So let me go a bit further. You have to observe that what you've just seen here are two computer scientists using words like Westphalian and post-Westphalian. One of the impacts of the network is to highlight and focus attention on disadvantaged minorities. Just consider the impact on the disadvantaged minority of the class of people we call political scientists, who now are shaking in their boots that computer scientists are using terms like Westphalia.
Just to follow on, you, Steve, you mentioned a minute ago we're in a transition. We've got to sort of, there are positives and there are negatives. There are governments who think they can control the use of the net and the information when you can't control that technology. But then there are positives and misabuse, as you've said, with regards to the internet. Is there any possibility that sort of modes of conduct or some agreement can be reached? I mean, each government is not different. Each region is very different.
Well, your last point, I think, is very important. It is not going to happen. It will happen. It will not happen uniformly. It will not happen all at once. There will be regional and other kinds of coalitions among countries that have common trading or other shared purposes. And then in other parts of the world, there will be different coalitions, there will be different arrangements. And so I think that we will see a mixture of only slowly emerging global norms and changes, and more rapidly, but not rapidly in their own right, but sort of as a precursor of global norms, will be a faster rise of regional norms, which is perhaps a relevant comment for what we're doing right here, right now. This event that we're at, this is the joint gala of the 25th anniversary of .th, and also the INET conference here, brings together people not only from Thailand, but from Southeast Asia and from the region in general. And one of the effects that we've seen very common throughout the internet is the rise of regional aggregations and a lot of cross-border activity that it does not requiring getting on a plane and flying around the world all the time, despite the fact that Vint and I do it all the time. But it's much more efficient and much more effective to bring people together in a kind of an expanded neighborhood.
Vint, any thoughts on that, please?
Well, you know, the internet has allowed information to flow remarkably freely all around the world. And you can imagine that at Google, we are great believers in sharing of information for everyone's benefit and helping people discover information that's of use. My sense right now is that this global sharing and freedom of expression, the ability to invent new applications in a permissionless way, are all some of the most positive benefits that the internet has brought. And although there are concerns at the government level and even at the individual level about content on the net, I think that historically speaking, what everyone has benefited from almost invariably is an open and free flow of information. So I'm hoping that governments and citizens who are worried about content that they consider hazardous will eventually be dealt with, not necessarily by suppression, but by people recognizing that it's in fact not useful information at all. This is called critical thinking, and one of the most important tools we have is to learn when and how to reject information which is not of any use. And my guess is that having several billion minds understand and reject bad information is a much more powerful tool than anything we could invent, either legally or technically.
There's also this just going on about the growth of the internet and access to the internet in some countries, obviously in developing countries. Those who have access to it are those who can actually afford it, even though the PCs and the laptops are getting cheaper, smartphones and mobile phones are getting cheaper. It's still those who can afford it and the middle class who have it. Meanwhile, although, let's say, for example, in Thailand, the penetration of mobile phones is quite high, but the level of smartphone usage is still low relative to that. But that then still creates a gap of knowledge and accessibility. Any thoughts on that? Will that eventually, I guess it depends on the state of the economy of each nation, will that gap eventually be reduced, do you think?
I'm sure it will, actually. You know, every country has a range of people in different economic situations. They have their own gaps independent of the internet in terms of class and income. And gradually over time, one of the great thrusts of history is to try to reduce the disadvantages at the lower end and try to bring a greater sense of equality, and at the same time try to have enough incentive so that there's an engine that drives all of this. That's the grand tension about capitalism versus socialism and so forth. And the internet, I think, is just sort of a small piece of that story. This gap that you've described existed in a much bigger sense at the very early days when a very, very few of us were privileged to have access to the network. And I can tell you that the people that we interacted with, we felt part of a very special society, and the idea of being disconnected from that was not palatable at all. And there were people who did not have access, but who understood it, who kept knocking on the door saying, I want to get in. And it took a little while to be able to figure out how to open those doors and make the network as available as it is today. So again, taking the very broad look, even though we're talking about a very large number of people, and even though it is now very visible, this digital divide, it is in some sense the last piece of this grand puzzle and is late in the evolution. And so I'm quite confident that, over time, a combination of technology and allocation of resources and focus of attention will take care of that.
Vint, any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I absolutely endorse what Steve had just said. To use his wonderful phrase, this grand arc of technology seems to always take that which is expensive and bulky and transform it eventually into something that we can use personally. And so when we see the advent of the smartphone with computing power well beyond what Steve and I had as graduate students in the form of large time-sharing systems that had to be in air-conditioned rooms, what you see is this sort of steady transformation of expensive and big into inexpensive, small, and personal. So we can anticipate what the society is going to be like as more and more of these kinds of things become personally available. Think for a minute about one of the hottest topics today, the 3D printer. Not everyone has these yet, but they will become increasingly available, and they'll be able to do more than just fabricate plastic materials. I've even seen some printers that are used to fabricate food, if you can believe that, although personally my reaction of eating a 3D printed meal is still some hesitation. But the idea is that ultimately all of these things will become available at reasonable cost. The mobile smartphone is certainly demonstrating that. There are 6.5 billion phones, mobile phones, available. Probably at least 30% or more of those are now smartphones. So I am absolutely certain that this gap will go away. It just takes time as the costs come down.
Can we just move to the role of the internet in education?
Sure.
I mean, it's revolutionized and given access to so many people who really didn't have the opportunity, and not only that, to governments, which they could harness this use of this internet. How do you feel about that? I mean, and how could it be better used, in your view? I mean, it's a tough question, but how could it be better used?
There's a huge number of efforts that have been put into building educational tools for people. Many of them are very limited in their scope and have not succeeded very much. Meanwhile, without trying very hard, you have dramatic things like Google that have totally revolutionized access to information and hence have also revolutionized the learning process. Like most students in the U.S., at a certain point in our education, we were ushered into the school library and we were taught how to use the tools to look something up in the card catalog and then to go to the shelf to find the book. To find things in magazines, we had to go to a periodical index and we had to look that up, a very laborious process, and we had to take notes on cards and we had to sort them and so forth. And we were subjected more than once through this rigorous process in order that we get good at using the library. It's hard to explain that notion to a youngster today. They just say, well, what do you want to know? Type it in.
That's right.
And the answer comes out. And the access to that knowledge base is a fundamental change in the educational process. It's not thought of quite that way. It hasn't gotten into the curriculum exactly, but every child who's growing up with access to the internet sort of instinctively goes to get information that way, and it just changes deeply the educational process.
Vint, some thoughts?
Well, thank you, Steve, for allowing me to jump in with the MOOC observation. This is the massive online open courseware that is becoming increasingly available. I'm sure many of the people in attendance tonight know the story about two of our Google colleagues who decided to teach a class last year in artificial intelligence, and they wanted to do it online. And they thought that maybe 500 people would sign up. And as it happened, 160,000 people signed up for the class. It was globally available. And of course, their reaction was, uh-oh, now what? Lots of work proceeded to write software to manage such a large-scale student population. Since that time, classes as large as 300,000 people have been online. Not everyone graduates necessarily, but I think of the 160,000 people that took that artificial intelligence course, at least 23,000 graduated. And I remember thinking, you know, if you had been teaching artificial intelligence for the last 30 years, you probably did not encounter 23,000 students over the course of that time. So in one class, they touched more people than anyone in the history of teaching artificial intelligence had ever touched. This is becoming increasingly popular and interesting, and the economics of it are dramatic. Let us imagine for a moment you have a class of 100,000 students. They're all over the world, and you decide to charge them each $10 for taking this class. That's a $1 million class. I challenge you to find me any professor who's ever taught a class that he was able to charge $1 million for. So the economics of this are dramatically different, and universities are going to have to understand how to adapt to this potential. My understanding is that John Hennessy, the president of Stanford University, is extremely enthusiastic about the evolution of this new technology.
Thank you. Just at this point, I was wondering if there anybody in the audience, we've been having this conversation, who would like to ask some questions. I don't know if we have microphones available, but is anyone who would like to ask either Vint or Steve a question? Vince, anybody, please.
I'll be happy to take questions afterwards for $10 apiece.
Anybody? Right there in the back, please. We have a microphone, I hope, maybe. It's on its way.
Might help to bring the house lights up a little bit.
That's right. Thank you. If you could please identify yourself and ask the question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nitipong Bunlong. I work for DTAC, one of the mobile company in Thailand. This is probably a question for Dr. Vincent Cerf. I see that you have a Google Glass on, and just wondering, how do you see the development of the Google Glass? Is it going to be like the next iPad devices or the next smartphone? Do you see in that direction?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the question. I see this as largely more like the mobile than anything else. This device is using, at the moment, a mobile for its communication, although it has Wi-Fi capability and it has Bluetooth capability. But the part that is most interesting to me is that it has speech recognition capability, so I can tell it to do things. I can give you a small example on the spot, although you won't see the result right away. I'm tapping it. It says, "Okay, Glass, take a picture." And although you can't see this happening, it just took a photograph of the screen that I'm looking at on my mobile. I'm on my laptop. So the ability for the computer to participate in the same environment that I'm in, to hear my voice, to interpret it, or to interpret touches that I make in the same way that a touchpad would be used on a laptop, means that I now have a hands-free access to the resources of the internet. And I have already found this extremely useful. I can see my email, I can respond to it by dictating answers, I can capture images that will remind me of things that I've done during the day or things that I should do. This is just the beginning. There are only a couple thousand of these in use right now. We're hoping to get more of them out on an experimental basis to allow people to evolve applications so that by the time this is a commercial product in 2014, it will have a larger collection of applications for people to use. But even now, for navigation, communications, and capturing of imagery and things of that sort, it's a very effective tool.
Anybody else has a question? Yes, please. ตรงนู้นครับ
Hello, Vint. My name is Hugh Tawisakorn Namtakul. We met about 12 years ago. My question to both of you, either of you can answer. Is it safe to use the internet in some countries? Is the big brother taking over and watch you when you are using the internet? Is your privacy lost when you are entering some country?
Yes, and Steve offers me the opportunity to respond. Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate that. Look, let me point out a couple of things. First of all, it's clear that the internet is a physical thing and that it's possible to have access to it and its contents. So the answer is yes, there is potential loss of privacy. However, I'd like to point out to you that we actually are destroying our own privacy, quite independent of any government involvement at all. Think for just a minute about people taking pictures, putting them up on, Facebook or YouTube or Google Plus or other photo sharing websites, and then someone else coming along and tagging the images, saying, "Oh, well, that's Steve Crocker or that's Vint Cerf," and then someone else coming along looking at these images, saying, "Oh, that's Vint Cerf, and he's at this place, and he told me he was somewhere else, and now I'm in trouble." So these actions that we take innocently actually erode our privacy, and we don't understand this because we haven't evolved social conventions to deal with the problem. So although I understand and appreciate your concern about government intervention and Big Brother, I think that socially speaking, we have evolved a set of tools and applications that actually erode our privacy because we don't understand what the side effects are of its use. So once again, we're back to this interesting question of evolving social conventions for preserving what little privacy we still have.
Privacy is very important. People are very concerned about keeping some information to themselves. As with all technologies, we have to sort of learn what the consequences are, and it's at some point it'll no longer be satisfactory to express surprise when you do something in public and there's a picture taken and that picture is then available to everybody and you get outraged and say that shouldn't have happened, and the answer should be, well, you should have known that that was going to happen. There is a flip side to all of this, which is we make extremely strong use of the promulgation of personal information for our own benefit. If you walk into a hotel that you have visited before and the concierge greets you by name and has your favorite drink waiting, is that a violation of privacy or is that high quality service? And in general, you have this whole tension between what's known about you being used for your benefit versus what's known about you being used in ways that you might not be so comfortable. But in both cases, you have quite a bit of information about yourself that is known by other parties, by other people. Finding the right balance, finding the right norms for all that is, again, an ongoing thing. I don't think there is going to be a single resting point. I don't think there's a notion of absolute privacy. And on the other hand, I think that we will establish some norms about what's proper and what's not proper.
Can I go on to the challenges you face now on the technical side with regards to ICANN and what you're doing? What do you see as the next step that you need to address, main issues?
Well, this one, I guess, is addressed to me since I'm currently the chairman of the board of ICANN, following in Vint's footsteps, who dragged me into this process some years ago. And Vint chaired very ably the ICANN board. ICANN has an interesting role with respect to the internet and with respect to internet governance. We have a very, very narrow, very restricted mandate to oversee the unique identifiers, the domain name system, the addresses, and other identifiers that are important. We are, however, the only structure, the only organization that is explicitly put together to do any kind of internet governance per se on a global basis. And so we get looked at as the organization for all things related to internet governance from time to time. A very heavy burden, right. One that we can't possibly fulfill, nor should we. So one of the challenges will be the creation of other institutions and the cooperative ecosystem that has to come into existence already in very strong measure does exist. One of the focal points of the internet ecosystem is in fact the Internet Society, which sponsors INET, the regional internet registries that oversee the address allocations within each region, the country code top level domains like .th, like the THNIC. So there is an ecosystem, but it's going to have to expand to include other things, law enforcement and commercial codes and so forth. Within ICANN, we currently are expanding the number of what are called generic top-level domains. This is gotten quite a bit of attention. It's brought a substantial amount of money into our bank account. People get all concerned about all that. We're being extremely careful and diligent to work through the process of evaluating each of the applications and to proceed in what we think is a very sensible step. But at the end of the day, there will be substantially more top-level domains in the root, and then we'll have to see what that impact is. But I think if one steps back and again, not too inwardly focused on just what we do at ICANN, but look at it in the broader sense of the full internet picture, it's a relatively small part of the rather dramatic set of changes that are continuing to take place.
Thank you. This is probably addressed to Steve more than because tomorrow you have a meeting with the Prime Minister. Have you thought of what you're going to say to her?
I'm looking forward to it because I understand that she is an extremely accomplished business person and very dynamic. And so I'm heading into this not so much from with a perspective of having a set of requests, but of wanting to learn what the world looks like from her point of view and to see if there's any insights into how to foster more communication and more cooperation and collaboration with this region.
Okay. Gentlemen, if there are no further questions, we only have a couple of minutes left. Vint, some final thoughts and words for the 25th anniversary of the Internet in Thailand? Can we hear from you and then from Steve, please?
Thank you for that opportunity. First of all, congratulations again. 25 years is really a big deal. And when I think of that being 1988, when the Internet begins to emerge in Thailand, that's really quite striking. I think, Steve, when you meet with the Prime Minister, one of the things you might bring up is the value and importance of Internet to the development of small and medium-sized businesses and their ability to potentially reach outside of the Thai economy to serve the rest of the world, which is a much larger footprint, a much larger market than the purely domestic one. And I hope very much that as Thailand invests in Internet infrastructure and its use in education and in business, that it will take advantage of this potential to reach around the world to deliver products and services to others.
Good. There is an important thing to add. One of the areas that I've specialized in over the last couple of decades is security matters related to the architecture of the Internet. And indeed, one of the reasons why I was very pleased to accept the invitation to come here is because THNIC, .th, was the first top-level domain in Asia to implement DNSSEC, the security extension for DNS. In conjunction with the meetings that we've described, the celebration of the 25th anniversary of .th, INET, There is a DNSSEC training workshop starting tomorrow morning, 3 days, 300 people from around the region. This is extraordinary. These are the people at the absolute center of the technical operations in ISPs and in top-level domains and in other related operations around this region, getting intensive training and exposure to a first-class set of experts who have come from all over the world to provide this. This is building both core capability, capacity building is the term of art, and a community that can draw upon each other. So that's will be the more geeky, if you will, activity of this entire week, but it may be the activity that has the most direct and enduring impact in terms of improving security in this region.
Ladies and gentlemen, for me personally, it's been a pleasure and honor to speak to Steve and Vint. I'd like to thank you for participating, your attention. Would you please a warm welcome, a warm thanks, sorry, for both gentlemen, the founders of the Internet.
Thank you very much. That was certainly a very fruitful and inspiring discussion. And Mr. Cerf, please do stay with us for a moment. And now may I invite Professor Dr. Kanjana Sood on the stage to give tokens of appreciation to Dr. Steve Crocker and Kun Pichai Shun Suksawat. And also, I would like to invite the VIP guests at this table on the stage to take a group picture.และสำหรับในค่ำคืนนี้ดิฉันและคณะผู้จัดงานคงต้องขอจบรายการบนเวทีแต่เพียงเท่านี้นะคะขอขอบพระคุณทุกท่านที่ให้เกียรติมาร่วมงานและขอกราบสวัสดีราตรีสวัสดิ์ค่ะ